Koto, everybody. My name's David Murphy. I'm the Chief Planning Officer at Palmerston North City Council. So I've spent most of my career in Palmy. I worked up in Taupo for a few years first, but I've been back here having a merry old time. So I've got a little presentation which I'm going to walk you through. I must admit, it's kind of talking to the converted here. I mean, most of my conversations are with people and developers and some politicians and community groups that we're still in the process of convincing the need for change. So bear with me a little bit, but we'll work our way through. So we are doing some good things in Palmy, and then I'll be able to share a few of those with you. So just seeing whether I can drive the, am I able to drive the PowerPoint from where I am? Or do you want me to share it from my screen?
I think if Andy, can you respond on that?
Yeah, sorry, I had to find the unmute button. You can do either, David. I was sharing from my screen, but if you want to run it, kick it up and share your screen.
Okay, if you maybe close yours down, I'll share it from mine. It might be a bit easier, I think.
Yep, there we go. Over to you.
All right, you can all see that?
Yep, that's good.
Cool. So yeah, I'll just talk a touch a little bit on Palmy's growth and our vision and plan. We've been doing some. We've had a spatial plan for 3 years. I'll talk you through that. All the management gurus talk about the value of storytelling. So I'll tell a little bit of personal stories about some of my experiences of walking in Palmy. I'll talk. The focus will be about the way in which we're trying to change the urban form and development of Palmerston North to create more walkable developments. And then towards the end, talk about some of the lessons and reflections, and particularly thinking about local government reform, resource management reform, and what that might mean for folk like yourselves who are wanting to make positive change to cities going forward, and what that may mean. So just a little bit about Palmy. So we've recovered really well after the lockdown. So an image here just shows the quarterly GDP growth of the country versus Palmy. So things are going well here in the city. There's a lot of infrastructure investment, a lot of private investment. Last calendar year, we consented 515 new dwellings. So that was the most on record, and our housing projections are strong. So, I think the city is at a bit of a crossroads in terms of how it manages that growth going forward. And that's encapsulated a little bit in our vision, which is small city benefits, big city ambition, and how we our CEO likes to say how we don't want to become a big Fielding, we want to become a small Wellington, which I think is quite a cool way of describing it. So this is an interesting, I was just talking about housing numbers and projected growth. You'll see here, this is just our local market preferences, and on the left-hand column, you'll see the average from sort of 1999 to 2017. The one I've highlighted is of most interest, I think. So our infill intensification preference over that sort of almost 20-year period was just over 30%. In the last 2 years, we've seen that close to 56%. So in a regional, I don't like the word provincial, but in a regional city, we are seeing a real change in housing preferences. And so there's a real opportunity there for how we make Palmy more walkable through new development. So I touched on our vision, so small city benefits, big city ambition. Probably of most interest to you, we have 4 key targets, but of most interest in terms of this talk is a 30% reduction in CO2 emissions in Palmerston North by 2031. Our city emissions are going the wrong way. We are making some good gains with our corporate emissions as an organisation. We've reduced those by close to 20%, but there's a lot of work to do in the city emissions. This presentation isn't about our climate change work, but we have developed a Palmy climate calculator, which we're quite proud about. So if you want to jump on the Google and have a look for that, you'll be able to find it. It's an interactive tool with some policy sliders that, there's a little sort of oblique cartoon image of the city, which changes as you decide your different policy drivers for Palmy. Here's our spatial plan. We've had this for 3 years. It's been updated as part of our latest LTP. So for those of you that know Palmy, it's actually quite a compact urban form. It looks like we have a lot of space around us, but we've got a lot of high class soils, we've got a lot of flooding in the rural areas beyond. A lot of the growth that we're planning is you know, in terms of greenfield growth, is very close to the existing urban area as much as possible. There's sort of three key big moves in the spatial plan. One is around the city centre and city centre revitalisation. So that's the yellow. The second is the blue corridor through the river. So for those of you that have been to Palmy recently, there's been a lot of investment in the river. So it's been massive uptake, probably more in recreational walking and cycling than commuting, but it does have the potential to be a commuter corridor. And the orange growth, the orange is the sort of the sustainable growth across industry and housing. We do have Key Rail planning a major regional freight hub, which has some potential significant decarbonisation benefits for Palmy and the country. So walking and new development, this is sort of the key what I wanted to talk about. I guess the first thing is, you know, you'll probably all know this, but, you know, planning can only influence new development. So we need to be really focusing our attention on new development. We have lots of good examples of walkable communities in Palmerston North. Just unfortunately, like probably the rest of the country, we just haven't been doing that for the last 40 years. We've been developing a city of parts. So I talk about the fact that unfortunately, each technical discipline has become its own audience. So all the transport people go away to transport conferences and talk about transport, and all the planning people go away and talk about planning, and all the parks people go away and talk about parks. But you know, we need to start thinking about city making, and I think we need to see ourselves as city makers, not technical experts in our own area. So there is a city making revival underway, but I guess my experience is the wins are really hard earned. So there's changes required at all levels, from spatial planning. We're seeing a bigger focus on that at a central government level, which is good. Master planning, district planning, and even site-specific design for each individual development. So we need to work in at all levels. So I talked earlier about storytelling, and I talked about the fact that we used to have, you know, we have really walkable communities in Palmy. So I grew up in Ashurst, which was a little village just out of Palmerston North, and in the my house is in the screen that's in front of you here. The house I grew up as a child, and within this area, I had my school, my local shops, parks, and all of my friends, and we walked everywhere. And that was, and I know this will be the case for a lot of you, so or everyone. But that was my experience as a child. As a teenager, our family moved to Palmerston North, and I grew up in this suburb here. My primary, intermediate school, high school, parks, all my friends, and it was a highly walkable community. As it happens, I chose to purchase our family home here. I have a couple of boys and a wife, of course, and you know, again, we you know, made a deliberate decision to choose a location where our family could walk to the facilities they need. One of the things I find in the council is we get a lot of people that choose to live in a different location and then actually recollect their memories of childhood, and then expect the same outcome, but they've made a decision to live in an entirely different location, in some cases a lifestyle block, and then they're lobbying the council for walking and cycling facilities to be able to access their schools. So you know, a bit of work to do, but anyway, so you know, as I said, we know how to build good walkable communities. We've done it. For whatever reason, in the last 40 years, we just haven't been doing it. And this is an example in Palmerston North. So this is a greenfield area that's developed in the last 15 odd years. A couple of major developers that don't talk to each other, poor connectivity, no direction in the plan. And this is just a highly unwalkable community. There's no schools. There's I think the nearest facility from the end of Pacific Drive is about a 3.5, 4K walk to the nearest shop. So we're working on what we call some urban sprawl repair in Aotearoa, and I'll talk a bit about that. Also, the way we, you know, the way our suburbs are starting to change. So this is a street that I grew up in. Dare I say it, I didn't live in a big mansion like this one. There's some more more conservative houses a bit down the road, but these are the types of environments that you know, we grew up in and walked in. So this street now looks like this. So intensification is a good thing. So you know, that's, you can see the big house and that house there in the back of the street there. So I'm not saying intensification is a bad thing, but the way we go about that in terms of creating walkable communities needs to change. So you know, this is not a particularly nice place to walk now. So this is I appreciate this is just a snapshot of a master plan that we're working on. So this is the urban sprawl repair that we're doing for Aotearoa. Unfortunately, a lot of this development has already happened, but we are dropping in place a master plan to try and sort of create turn this semi-half developed greenfield area into a more walkable community, putting in a centre. We're working with the Ministry of Education to try and get a school up in this location, and there's been some really positive responses. So this is on the southern side of the river in Palmy. While I said that we are getting a significant uptake in infill and intensification, we do recognise to meet our NPS urban development requirements, we need to be providing for some greenfield development. So this is a significant area we're planning to the west of Palmerston North. So for those that know it, between sort of the city and Longburn. So this will be upwards of 6,000 lots in an area that we're calling Kaka Tangiata. So you can see the difference compared to what we've seen under those first generation district plans in terms of the outcomes that we're expecting. A more traditional, well-connected community. We've got a couple of schools, some parks, and a secondary school planned in this location, obviously subject to what the ministry Ministry of Education, sorry. So I've just got a collection of images now of some of the outcomes we're a bit more prouder about, where we've been working hard with the development community to try and create development that is more, more infill, more intensification, but also creating walkable communities. So this was one where we worked hard with the developer and the designer to try and get a good, strong connection with the street. Again, this was a site where we had a couple of old bungalows that were redeveloped into 8 townhouses. And worked hard with the landowner and the developers to make sure that we had a strong connection with the public space, some good vegetation, front doors connecting with the street, and low front fences. So quite different to those outcomes I showed earlier with the big block walls. We have a program which we call Delivering Change. So what we do is it's a council funded program, and where we have developers looking at doing infill or intensification, we grab them early and we model out and basically design for them at a conceptual level how their site could be redeveloped. So this is one we've done recently on Main Street, which is a site that has been looked to be redeveloped. So all of these concepts of designs have been delivered through our Delivering Change Fund. So the applicants come to us, we utilise the fund, and it's about trying to lead the horse to water, for want of a better term, and getting the developers to think differently about how housing can be delivered in Palmerston North. So here's another example on Fitzherbert Ave, which went to the main route in from Massey University into the CBD. This is a site which is ready for development. So in this case, again, we're doing the concept design. We're saying to the developer, this is within a 5 minutes walk of the CBD, this location. We're saying to the developer, if you do this, you'll get consent. And we've done the hard work for you. We're also, as a council, thinking really hard about how we can use some of our green space. And I know transition of green space in cities can be hugely controversial. So this is an old bowling green, which has sat vacant since 2005. And the city is in the process of changing. It's got some specific legislation. Again, it's on the commuting route out to Massey University, good public transport. And again, probably a maybe a 7-minute walk into the CBD, but lots of close amenities down to the river. So with council, we modelled this out, and we did a series of concepts, traditional development, and then some slightly high density, and worked through some different scenarios, which I'll flick through relatively quickly, but you'll get a good sense there. That we are trying to change the story of a regional city and the types of development that can be delivered. So we're in the process of working with government to get the controls removed off this piece of land and some others in the city to enable reserve space to be developed for housing as a leadership model by the city. So some lessons and reflections from my perspective. I appreciate it's been a bit of a whirlwind presentation, but it's an absolute constant battle. I've been, as I said, been at the council a wee while now, and we're sort of playing the long game in terms of the change that's required. We're constantly working on politicians, developers, advisors, and community. But despite some wins, it is really, really tough going in terms of influencing development in a positive way. We have wrestled some control, but I don't say this lightly. There is sustained professional bullying of people who are trying to drive positive change in a city, despite everything that I've presented to you being consistent with council's strategic direction. The staff that are tasked with delivering this change are subjected to sustained professional bullying in a range of places, and it's really challenging. There's a shortage of planners, architects, and draftspersons who understand and value of design, and I think that's a reflection of 30 years of the RMA with the market-led approach. So the Delivering Change program that I talked about, we're leading a horse to water in terms of the development community, funding those designs. Sometimes they're drinking, other times they're not. We're trying to repurpose public land. I think you'll all know that the RMA has not been helpful for urban planning, and we've seen the examples of that in PALMY and a lot of other places. And clearly effects-based planning hasn't worked, and it's lost sight of the big picture and the outcomes that we're working towards. So as you'll all know, there's significant government reform planned across 3 waters: resource management and local government. I think the combination of those 3 coming together, 3 waters is making good progress. Resource management, the Natural and Built Environment Act exposure draft of the early parts of the Act are coming out for consultation shortly through Select Committee, and the local government reform is a bit earlier. But I think there's some really interesting questions about how this will all come together and the impact on local government and planning going forward. Certainly in terms of the resource management, there appears to be a greater focus on outcomes as opposed to effects in the conversations that are happening. And I think that's a positive thing. Too often we end up spending an inordinate amount of time looking at the actual effects of a development rather than, is this actually working towards the outcomes that we want as a community. As you'll know, there's been talk of 16 combined district plans or planning documents for the country. I think that's interesting. It's challenging. I think it potentially can work, provided it's done in the right way. I think there's some question marks about whether the current regional boundaries are most appropriate and the future role of regional councils. I think there's been an assumption around those combined plans that they'd be based on the current regional council boundaries. Certainly our regional council runs from Taumarunui down to Levin. I think running a planning exercise for an area that large will be a challenge. As I said, I think 16 combined plans could work if there is a high level of discretion retained in the plan and planners are able to assess based on outcomes. I think if we move back to a permissive generalized, what I call a permissive generalized sort of regional approach, we'll end up losing some of those gains we've been able to make in the last probably decade. We've learned to use the RMA to try and to get some better outcomes. So there's also some talk, I think, around reducing the role of elected members in resource management planning decisions. That's an interesting question. I think, in terms of the panels that they're talking about, they appear to be some of the early suggestions are that they're more technical led, and the direction will come through the spatial plans, but the decision making for the spatial plans looks like it'll change a bit as well. So I think there's in terms of local democracy, because I certainly know that's driven a lot of the positive change that I've talked about here as an officer that we're tasked with delivering. It'll be one to watch, I think. So people will have different views on that. But that was all I had to say. It's been a fun journey thus far, and we've got some more work to do. But it's going to be a challenging time ahead. So I'm happy to answer some questions.